What's up guys, Ryan here, Fly Fish Iowa. Hey, today I wanted to talk a little bit about targeting fish in our local ponds. Your largemouth bass and your bluegill are two of the more common targets because they're a little more willing to eat. Occasionally crappie do find their way into our ponds. Channel cats can be tricky, especially in our local ponds, because there's usually not as many of them, and also they are typically bottom feeders. They're typically not going to be as active during the day. So in Iowa ponds, I'm a huge fan of throwing something in the 4 to 6 weight variety. I often throw a 9-foot 5 weight, and that's really a great setup. I'd have a leader in the 7.5 to 9 foot range. You can buy those at your local sporting goods stores or fly shops. We typically use floating lines in our Iowa ponds. Our ponds don't usually have a max depth of beyond 15 feet. When you're fishing a floating line, that gives you the flexibility to fish poppers, nymphs, or streamers. And so having topwater and subsurface options just gives you flexibility as you present your flies. When I'm just out prospecting and trying to find fish, I'm usually fishing some kind of streamer, potentially with a small nymph behind it to try to find some fish. A lot of our ponds have bass that range up to 20 inches, and our bluegill tend to be on the smaller side in our public ponds, but there are some nice ones as well. And so having a 5 weight is a good all-around mix, because if you do get into a larger bass, a 5 weight can handle it if it has to, but also it's not too overpowering for the bluegill, so you still get a good fight with some bluegill. If you're brand new to fly fishing, ponds are a fantastic place to start, whether that's farm ponds or public urban ponds. Because there are typically a lot of bluegill and largemouth bass in these ponds, it's a great place to get started and get plenty of interest from fish. And that's going to keep you interested as well. So fishing these ponds definitely varies throughout the year. If you're fishing early season, I'm talking March, April here in Iowa, our water temperatures are still in that sub 50 degree range. Once we get into late April, we start to see those water temperatures warm up, and we do see fish a little bit more active, and we have to change up our presentations a little bit. Once you get into the summertime, you actually see a lot of weed growth start to build up on the edges of these ponds. And that does change things a little bit, but if you try to find ponds where you can still get a cast out in the water, you should be just fine. A lot of these fish use these weeds on the edges as cover, and so it's actually a great place to fish right along the edges of the weeds. So if you're finding that your pond is totally overrun by weeds and algae on the edges, try to find a different pond. Depending on the depth of the pond that you're fishing, you might have a little extra weed growth around the edges, especially if those ponds have a nice long shelf before they drop off. When they have that nice long shelf, that's perfect for that sun to heat up the water to really warm temperatures and make it ideal for algae and weed growth. But if you have a pond that has a shorter shelf that drops off quicker, you're going to find that algae does not extend out as far into the pond. So check on those things as you're scouting your ponds. Don't be afraid to check out and see how much algae is on the edge of my pond in May, how much is on the edge of the pond in June, in July. You'll find that a lot of our ponds, as you get into June, July, and August, are going to have a lot of algae and weed buildup on the edges. Typically, you want to stick to mornings and evenings as you push into the later summer. Some of these ponds get to ridiculously warm temperatures, and so those bass and bluegill, they really shut down until those water temperatures cool off. Mornings are going to be when you have your coolest temperatures of the water. Evenings, you actually have very warm temperatures in the water, but that low light sometimes can trigger some fish to become active as well. Something I see when people are fishing ponds is that they tend to concentrate too much on one area of the pond. Yeah, maybe you caught a fish there last week, but ponds do have fish that move around, especially as the temperatures change throughout the seasons. So make sure that you're covering water in these ponds, because a lot of our urban ponds, you can fish all the way around them in not very much time. Check new spots, check new ponds altogether, because one pond may be great one year and the next year it might not be so good. Maybe that age class has died off and now you're left with a bunch of smaller fish in the pond, or maybe your age class is now up higher and there's not as many fish in the pond even though they're a little bit larger. So make sure that you're checking new ponds out as you're fishing and seeing what you can find in new ponds, because there are tons and tons of ponds across Iowa, especially central Iowa, that are great for fishing. If you're going to fish in your urban parks and ponds, make sure that you're aware of people that are around you. There are some ponds that have sidewalks and trails directly behind the water, and so if you're casting a fly rod right behind you, you're going to find that you potentially could hit somebody with a fly. So make sure you're always aware of your surroundings, you're always looking around and seeing what's around you so that you don't injure somebody else while you're fishing. Ultimately, every pond is different, and every pond has fish that act different at different times of the year. So get outside and check out your local pond and see what you can find in your area and try to figure out the fish for yourself. I can give you some of the basics, but you are the one who needs to figure out how to catch the fish by yourself, and you can do it. So get out there, start experimenting, and see what you can do. Tight lines, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the water. I'm going to put a link in the description to a fantastic resource called Fish Local. Fish Local is an Iowa DNR initiative to promote fishing in your neighborhood. There are ponds all over Iowa that are initially stocked with largemouth bass and bluegill and sometimes even channel cats, and they are full of lots of fishing opportunities for people of all ages. And there's probably one not too far from where you live.